At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Alara Sage, welcome to the show.
Hi, so welcome. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Hey, it's great to have you on the show. So where are you at? Where are you living?
Right now I'm in Denver, Colorado, outside of Denver, Colorado.
Okay, cool. So the weather's just gotten really nice there, hasn't it?
Yeah, I just arrived back here, so I skipped all that.
Oh, I know the feeling. I know the feeling. So what I'd love for you to do is to kind of share with the audience. I find it very interesting, the story and the background behind what motivated someone to be at the point of where they're at. And with what you're doing, what's your story behind that?
Yes, I have actually a really fun story. So this was back in around 2014, and at the time of my life, I was meditating regularly. I very much started my spiritual practice, but at the time, I was a physical therapist to horses. So I did body work on horses. And so one day I got into my car because guess what? Like the thing about horses, you really have to go to them. They're
Right.
not like clients who come to you. They don't do the online thing, right? So I got into my car and I was driving down a back road and headed towards the horses. And my higher self came in and said, Om 3 times. Now, I knew what oming was, but it wasn't something I practiced myself. So I was like, that's kind of strange, but okay. So I took a nice deep breath, Om, all the way to the end. And I did that 3 times. And at the very end of that third breath, an energy shot from the base of my body through and out my crown. And I went into full body orgasm. At the time, I had never experienced a full body orgasm. That was not something I experienced sexually, let alone driving down the road in a car. So I pulled the car over and really gifted myself the glorious experience of a full body orgasm. And it lasted for a couple of minutes, and I had no idea what was happening to me. And after those couple of minutes subsided, I was in a state of ecstatic bliss. I was just on cloud nine. I felt so lit, so alive, so joyous, so blissful. And again, I had no idea what had happened, but I got back on the road. I was driving down the road. I remember having, the music cranking. I was dancing in the car. I was waving at everybody. And the energy remained there for most of the day and kind of subsided. And then what happened was I went into 5 months of kind of chaotic energy because what had happened to me is what's called a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, where the Kundalini Shakti wakes up. And normally it's quite a process, quite a, almost a lifelong journey for that energy to move through your body and move out your crown. And that's where you hit divine union, which is ecstatic bliss. But mine had been instant and spontaneous, but I didn't know any of that. And what happened was, as that Kundalini shot through my body, she unleashed, released all of, or not all of, but much of the stored emotion, the stored trauma that I hadn't processed throughout my life that was in my body. And so for 5 months, I was all over the board. One minute I would be just on the floor crying, grieving. I didn't even know what I was grieving, but I was grieving. I was sobbing. I was wailing. The next minute I was laughing hysterically. And the next minute I was raging, just screaming, so much anger and rage moving through my body. And, interestingly enough, before this had happened, I had really considered myself like an emotionally stable person. but I was actually emotionally suppressed. So this immense amount of an intense emotion I was not used to. And I even checked in with my higher self. Am I going crazy? And higher self said, breathe and allow. Yeah, I love higher selves. And I asked that about 3 times throughout that 5 months experience. I was never told during that time what had happened to me. And then after about 5 months, it started to reach back to an equilibrium. And that's when a book landed in my lap, came into my universe, called Kundalini Awakening. And the first chapter was Spontaneous Awakening. And it like just nailed to the head of what I experienced. But what that really taught me and showed me, and why I bring it forward as my story, besides it just being fun, is that I was living really shut down. I was numb. Like I wasn't enjoying my life. I had, this perfect life from the outside. Everything seemed great. I wasn't lit at all. I was numb and shut down, bored. And that experience showed me like what I was capable of, like the immense amount of sensation and experience that was really possible for me. So after that, it was like, yeah, how do I make that my norm? And like, what is the difference and what happened? And really trying to understand that and then help other people to achieve that as well.
Well, and that is such, I would imagine, an unusual experience, and yet maybe not for your clients. But when you talk about Kundalini, could you explain what that is?
Yes. So Kundalini is ultimately the primordial femme, but she lives within all of us, and regardless of our sexual identity. And, when we see the Western medicine, the cross and the two snakes, that is the Kundalini. It is the serpent energy. So it's kind of ironic that Western medicine stole that really from Eastern philosophy. And what she is for one, she's the primordial femme that is within all of us. It is very much the creative life force energy, the pure potentiality that exists within us. And when she awakens, she's known as Kundalini. And when she awakens, she becomes Shakti, the goddess Shakti. And like I said, she generally moves through your body and it takes, a journey. And she moves, through your chakras and up through the crown where she meets Shiva, and that's divine union of self.
Well, and you talk about she, so is this only applicable to women, or is this something that men can experience also, but it's just kind of part of the feminine part of them, or are you just referring to her as a she, more of a female situation?
No, as I said, she's in everybody, regardless of sexual identity. She's the feminine that exists within all of us. Yes.
All right. Well, interesting. How would you explain that? Now, you talked a little bit about chakras. Is there that relationship between chakras, and particularly, I guess, would this be the root chakra or the sacral? Where would that resonance really initiate from?
Yeah, there's a couple of different theories. Some say she's at the base of the spine. That's not where I experience her. I experience her right above the root chakra, right there, inside of the body. Yeah, and really, I feel that she's governed by the sacral.
Well, and let's talk about this energy and this consciousness. Now, I know that you talk a little bit about creator consciousness. Is that also part of this Shakti, or is that a separate thing that comes to pass because of that awakening?
Such a delicious question. Yeah, it's definitely interwoven. To me, creator consciousness is our ability to consciously create our reality. And we do that best when that Shakti is activated and alive and, really moving through our body, at least to our heart, because creator consciousness is something that I teach. It really focuses on three primary chakras: the sacral, the heart, and the pineal. So when she's moved at least all the way up to the heart, there's really this profound devotion to serving the whole, serving ourselves through the whole, serving oneness and love.
And when you talk about the pineal, are you talking about the third eye chakra? Because most people that are looking just strictly at chakras are not really considering that the pineal gland, although I totally get what you're talking about. Can you kind of explain that and where that comes from?
Yes, third eye chakra. That's correct.
Okay. And why do you bring up pineal?
That's a really great question. To me, it has a lot to do with the pineal because that chakra is all about light. It's about the projection of light and the reception of light, light being information. And so the pineal both receives light, like it's a third eye, and it also projects light, our imagination, into our reality. And that's one of the ways creator consciousness works, is through the projection of our imagination into our physical reality.
Okay, so you were mentioning that you were living your life and everything seemed, externally, everything seemed really fantastic, and yet you realized that you were totally blocked by earlier experiences that may or may not have been conscious. I don't know for you, but can you kind of explain from your own point of view how that happens to all of us and what happens and how do we find ourselves in that situation? And then how do we find ourselves without driving in a car going to horses? How do we find ourselves being able to, number one, be aware of that? And then number two, start on the process of eliminating that blockage that literally is causing us to have an entirely different perception of life than what reality truly is.
Yes, great question. So answering the first one, how does this happen to all of us? We just aren't taught, are we? We're not taught how to be emotionally intelligent. We're not taught how to process trauma. And, a lot of times that word inflicts this idea that it has to be really intense, but trauma can be like Chinese water torture. It can be a repetitive thing, a small repetitive thing over and over again. And it can be instances that perhaps from the external don't seem so traumatic, but to us in that moment were traumatic. And if we don't know how to process that energy through our body, it stays in our body and it continues to vibrate, at that trauma. And, over time, we just keep like basically piling on these experiences of things that we've gone through that we haven't fully witnessed the nugget of wisdom that was really available in that moment. And that's what happens when we really allow ourselves to fully process and experience. There's always wisdom that transues through that. But if we're not available to that, it's just remaining pain or trauma. It can also be ancestral and karmic as well. And so we're moving through life and continuing to add to these. And, again, because we don't talk about these things, most of it we just don't even realize, for one, how deeply painful a lot of this is. And then we don't realize that the pain is our gateway to pleasure. The pain is our gateway to our own metamorphosis and our own transcendence. We in our society dictate that pain is bad and, hey, just pop a pill and get rid of it and deny it and reject it, move away from it, do whatever you can to not experience it. Meanwhile, the pain is trying to teach us something. So the way that our society views emotions, the way that our society views pain and discomfort has created these ways in ourselves that we're just like, oh, I need to push that away, not feel it, not face it, because it says something that I can't handle. And so we deny it. And I always say that denial is such a powerful, powerful force because what you deny, you literally place outside of your awareness and you cannot see it and you cannot feel it. It's like a numbness, just like when your body is numb and you can rub your finger over it and you're like, wow, I don't even realize that my finger is there because it's numb. That's what denial does. And it shuts us off from ourselves. And so that is how it transpires. That is how it happens to all of us. And, how do we become aware of it? I would say our reality is always reflecting to us, right? I always say we're walking around in a house of mirrors. One of the ways that I point my clients is through their innate desires. we have these desires that we've had most of our life. And some people have numbed themselves so much that they don't even know what those desires are. And if anybody is listening to this and they're like, huh, desires, yeah, I don't even know what that is. Like, I can guarantee you have very strong desires. You've just denied them. But those desires are there to guide us towards ourself, to more realization of our genius and how this unique fractal as a human really reflects the light of God. And so if we are able to say, hey, my desires are to create this, and I'm not creating that. Like, instead of creating my desire, I'm creating all of this. That's the reflection. That's what's showing you really what exists in your body. Our reality is always showing us what's vibrationally going on in our body.
Well, and you mentioned a couple of things that brought some other things to my mind. One is, as children, we experience, as you say, we don't necessarily go through some of these horrific stories of physical abuse, emotional abuse, and so forth. But as children, we have our own little perception that goes on. So a parent may say something in a very, meaningful, positive way, and our perception will be that we're getting criticized or we're not good enough or those types of things. And so that becomes a real challenge. And obviously, as you say, learning to figure these things out and work with them, we're never taught that as a child. I don't know anyone that sits down with a child and says, all right, let's look at this and here's how you go through this process. So what do parents do to help their children to not get so imprinted with all of this stuff that ultimately affects their life? What can parents do, if anything, to try to minimize that based on your experience?
Yes, so great question. I am a parent. I have two boys, an 11 and a 9-year-old. This is always something that I'm being curious in my own space. And one of the things I've found is communication. And my boys know for me that, just talk. Like, I will talk. I share with my boys. I'm very vulnerable about things that are happening in my life, how I'm feeling. And that sets up the stage for them to feel very vulnerable to share with me. And just as you said, sometimes I'll say something and we're hashing it out, right? The boys are fighting and I'm like, all right, let's all talk through this. And I'll say something and my son will be like, well, mom, you said that and that makes me feel this way. And I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, that wasn't my intention. Right. So exactly to your point. So that communication, like being able to talk through it, right? And so that we can recognize, okay, you're feeling this way. And then it's about teaching them that emotional intelligence. Like, that's what I'm teaching my boys, emotional intelligence. You are responsible for your emotions. For one, nobody can make you feel anything. Let's rewrite that in our society.
Yeah.
People can say things that can trigger you, absolutely, but that trigger is your responsibility. And so helping my boys recognize those triggers in themselves, be able to really be present with those feelings, express those feelings, because I wasn't taught to express. So when my parents did something that made, like, I was almost at it there, that made me feel, where my
Right.
parents did something where I felt like, oh, I'm not worthy enough. There was no space for me to say, hey, I feel like now I'm not worthy, or that wasn't enough, or I'm never pleasing you, right? There was no space for that. So I think really giving kids voice and truly listening to what they have to say.
Well, and you brought up something else, and you just barely mentioned it, but I find I've really been researching this because being here in Thailand right now,
Mm.
with the Buddhist culture, there's this whole concept of past lives.
Mm.
And personally, from my personal belief, that is something that I find difficult to understand. I have very good friends who have experienced that, and I do not doubt their experience.
Mm.
But at the same time, for me, scientifically and everything else, I'm going, how does that work? And then I was introduced to this concept of ancestral
Mm.
memory and how DNA holds on to much of that ancestral memory in our DNA, and depending on what's going on, we can potentially have that become our emotions without us even understanding that. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's scientifically proven that we are actually receiving information genetically. And, I work with this a lot with my clients, both ancestral and, past, what I prefer to call parallel life regression. And with the ancestral, when we start to connect to that genetic information, it's amazing the doors that open up. Perfect example. The other day, I was working with a woman, helping her to conceive, and we went into a session, and she's done quite a lot of work on herself prior to meeting me. And we went back to the womb, and we were working with when she was in the womb. And turns out, she already knew this, but her mother's mother died while her mother was pregnant with her. And then as we opened up the door of information, there was all this ancestral energy around lots of people having really close people to them die when they were pregnant. And so that gets imprinted. And so now she's been resisting conceiving because there's this fear of, well, she has it as her mother would die. So subconsciously, through that genetic information of, hey, when you get pregnant, somebody dies, right? That's the genetic information.
Yeah.
She already had another fear around her mother dying for another reason that we unfolded as well. And so it was like her belief with those two together was like, her mother is going to die if she conceives. So the power of seeing that and realizing that, just like the aha moment that she had, so that we can release that energy from her so that she can conceive.
Wow. And you hear those stories and it's so amazing, and it's wonderful for people to start to open up and have their curiosity and realization become more the fact that, you know what, why am I doing this? Why am I acting this way? And realizing that, I mean, I've had that. I go back, so did this happen? Did this happen in my childhood? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden it's like, you know what? This happened previously to one of my ancestors, and now it's affecting me, which I find fascinating. And also, when you talk about epigenetics, what's going to happen now with the client that you just talked about, which potentially could have been passed on to her children and so on and so forth. Once she realized that, is that going to make a difference for her descendants?
I believe so. I can't 100% say that. And actually, ironically enough, I've never like felt into that energy where I would have a little bit more certainty in answering that question, because I am very, very tapped in and I really believe the wisdom that comes through me. And simultaneously, it really is a chain of information. And so when we are the ones that are deciding to create something differently, consciously, right? Which is different than just, how sometimes genetics can skip, right?
Right,
Generations.
right.
That's not a conscious decision. You're not, because it's always about like facing the fear, right? Acknowledging that the fear exists and then taking action with that fear in a place of an open heart and love. When we do that consciously, that's what actually transmutes that belief that's been passed through.
Yes, and my studies have shown, and research that I've studied has shown that actually, when we talk about epigenetics, that you can literally, as you change that consciously, you literally change those epigenetic and genetic situations to where your children and your children's children are not necessarily going to experience that again, which I find fascinating, which means that you literally can affect generations to come by consciously working on yourself and eliminating, or at least moving away and letting go of some of those issues. So you talked a little bit about chakras, creative centers. You talk about three main creator centers. What are those, and what does that mean?
Yeah. So from my perspective, to create our reality consciously, we're primarily, of course, we need all of our chakras, right? Like we use all
Right.
of our chakras in every single moment. But there's three primary chakras for creating our reality consciously. And that's our sacral chakra, our heart, and like our third eye, our pineal. And so the sacral, that is the governing chakra of our creative life force energy, as well as our sexual energy, where our sexual energy is creative life force energy too. All of our sexual energy is creative life force energy, but not all of our creative life force energy is sexual.
Right.
So that is all about learning how to utilize that energy and really bring it to the heart, which our heart is the connection to our soul. And this is where those desires truly reside. And those heart's desires, those innate desires that, like I said, are really trying to connect us to our genius, which is also rooted in our heart, our unique genius. And so as we connect deeper and deeper in the heart, create self-love, forgiveness, compassion, we open up more of our unique genius, and that's creative life force energy gets to come through that fractal, that shard of glass, of colored glass is how I like to call it, to create our reality. And then, as I mentioned, with the pineal and the third eye, it's a lot about using our imagination, because our mind is so powerful. Our thoughts are constantly creating our reality. And even more so when we play in the realm of imagination, where we're activating the mind in imagery, as well as activating the body to feel and to sense that imaginary space. We are really literally vibrating at that version of ourself, and that creative life force energy, that Shakti, is really bringing that, birthing that through into our reality.
So how does somebody do that? Is it meditation? Is it? I know. Well, for me, that's what I focus on. But for others, how does one start to really focus on those energy centers or those chakras, and particularly, as you say, the sacral, the heart, and then the nail or the third eye? And science is actually showing that as the pineal gland is activated more, healing throughout the whole body occurs because of the hormones and everything else that's released. But how does an individual start to learn how to literally become aware of that and focus on that and heal that as necessary?
Yeah, such a great question. First and foremost, it is always about awareness. So I love that you say that right off the bat. It's always about awareness. And, definitely you can meditate. And also what you can simply do is breathe with your awareness at a chakra. Sometimes it's really helpful to like put your hand there so that there's a touch sensation. So you're maintaining your mind there. You can even like rub it. Another thing you can do is tap it, right? Because tapping automatically tells the body to relax, to to release. And so like right now I'm tapping my sacral, but I could also be tapping my heart. So, you can tap that chakra and then just breathe with your awareness focused on that chakra. So that's going to, as we know, where your awareness goes, your energy flows. So as you're tapping and you're breathing and you're holding your awareness there, you're bringing a lot more energy into that space. And the process of really truly stepping into greater consciousness is becoming very familiar with your body and with your energy centers, because everything is conscious. So to say that you can create your reality consciously but not really know where your chakras are and are they open and how does it feel and what is the energy there right now isn't really true, right? Because we need to be really feeling what's going on. And okay, this, my sacral chakra is really lit, my Shakti is open, or it's not today, because I'm feeling a little bit of inadequacy, or I was triggered, or I'm a little bit feeling of unsafety, right? So it's always about awareness, and we can do that through that breathing and that tapping. That's really how I started. When I started this whole thing, I just started focusing my awareness on the chakra and breathing there. And it's amazing how, if you really stick to that, the amount of information that will open up for you, and also just the self-healing that just naturally takes place.
Well, and I may be asking a question that you may not be totally, comfortable with, but as you talk about the different experiences we're having. And I think this is where awareness comes in. So all of a sudden we're sitting there and going, wow, I'm feeling inadequate, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling this or that. Are you able to identify, based on the emotions and the type of emotions that are being experienced, which chakra may be closed?
Absolutely. But I can feel it in people's bodies. So I'm extremely empathic as soon as I'm talking to somebody, in the right circumstance. Like I don't just go around feeling everybody. I have boundaries.
Right.
I respect
Okay.
everybody's space. But when a client is talking to me, even as they're talking, their bodies
Hmm.
are lighting up. Their
Okay, so
chakras are lighting up.
I'm not talking to you, I am right now, but let's say that I'm not a client of yours, but I've
Yeah.
listened to this and I'm really fascinated by this and I'm feeling this emotion. Can you explain the different chakras and which emotions are related to the different chakras, or does that go a little bit too far?
We can. And I will say that sometimes I feel that they will correlate into two chakras. But
Uh-huh.
absolutely. Like, do we want to go through a list of them? Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying?
very quick. So let's start at the root chakra. What are the emotions that are related to the root chakra? And we can go fairly quickly. We don't have to spend a lot of time on that. But I think it would be interesting for the audience to
Absolutely.
understand how that is.
Absolutely. So root chakra is all about safety, safety of your physical body, as well as safety in the tribe, the community. So a sense of you're not safe, you're not secure, which could also be financial security.
Okay, so that's the root, and we get to the sacral.
Yeah. So sacral is a lot about connection with other people. So when you don't feel safe in connecting, inadequacy is in the sacral chakra. So inadequacy of your life, of what you're creating. For women, it lives literally in the womb. Um, and sacral chakra is a lot of it's the emotional body as well. So there can actually be a lot of energy there emotionally. So a lot of our trapped emotions go there as well. But a direct one is shame. Shame is such a part of the sacral, largely because we shame sexuality and power and money. And that's all rooted in our pelvis.
Okay, and as we move up to the next chakra,
It's all about our will. And so the energy of not enough, as well as control, disempowerment, or being over empowered by other people.
okay, and what is that called again? That's the one chakra I can never
Solar
remember the name.
plexus.
The solar plexus. Okay, great. And then we get to the heart chakra.
Yes, obviously self-hate, self-judgment, self-criticism, as well as resentment, bitterness, um, and just anywhere that you haven't forgiven, that you're just holding on still to that. Oh, also grief.
Ah, okay, okay. And then we get to the throat chakra.
Yes, this is all about expression. So the feeling that you can't express, that your voice isn't heard or received. It's also the ears, so that you're not heard, you're not completely heard, you're not understood, or that you can't speak, you can't be heard.
Okay, and then you get up to the third eye or the pineal gland chakra.
Yeah, there's a lot of religion there. And I have nothing against religion, but there's a lot of religious dogma there. And also with the crown, just about things we've been taught that how we can or cannot connect directly to source energy. Um, as well as the third eye is all about our vision and our psychic powers. So there's a lot of trauma in there that, that's bad. We're not allowed to have psychic abilities and powers. So there's a lot of shutting down there within our ability to see. The other thing is the imagination, because when we're children, we have very strong imaginations, and then we're often, again, that's not like fostered. So that imagination, the inability to see, the inability to foresee, the inability to have imagination and vision.
All right, and then you get to the crown.
Yeah, so the crown is the father, and it's very much about connection to God, to source, and any level of not feeling able to, not feeling worthy of opening up to that. There can also be even some anger. It would be simultaneously the heart as well, but like people do have strong anger, resentment towards God.
Well, and I know some people talk about an eighth chakra, an eighth energy center that's sitting a little bit above the head. Are you familiar with that one at all?
Yeah, I mean, we have chakras that go above our head. We have chakras that go below our feet. So there's a lot of chakras.
Ah, okay. All right. So, how does an individual, we talk about the creative consciousness. How does an individual utilize that to literally look at their life and say, you know what, this is not where I want to be. This is not who I want to be. Here's who I want to be, and here's the experience that I want to have in life. How do they take that creative consciousness and literally start to create a different experience for themselves, a different life for themselves, whatever that happens to look like to them?
Yes, such a great question. I mean, the first thing is to get really clear on what you desire. And I would even take it a bit deeper and ask yourself, why? Because that why is really important. Again, we want to feel it in the heart because we don't want our desires to be egoically driven, which they can often be disguised. Our ego isn't bad, it's not wrong. But we want to really be creating from the heart space because the heart truly serves the whole, serves the one. Whereas the ego, even though it can portray itself as serving others, it has underlying connotations of serving the self. So asking yourself why and being really brutally honest with yourself. Like you're talking to yourself. So don't try to sugarcoat it, right? Don't try to make it sound good. Get really clear with yourself because if your why is like self-sourcing, you or like, superficial in the self, I mean, you want to like reevaluate that. But once you have that clarity, like get really clear, write it down. Start envisioning it. Like, what does your life look like as you're in that version of yourself? But it's not just about our pineal, right? It's about our sacral, which is emotional. So, how does it feel emotionally to be in that version of yourself? How does it feel in the sensations of your body to be in that version of yourself? If you spend time in that imaginatory space, what will happen is you will begin to trigger the information of dissonance, what is standing between the version of you now and the version that exists in that, the dissonance. And, that's the hardest part.
Yeah.
The imagination is super fun and it generally feels really good in the body. And then you have to face the discomfort. And, I said it originally and I'll say it again. It's through our pain that we transcend, ascend, expand, grow as individuals. So, if you really want to create something beautiful for yourself, guess what? Like you're going to have to move through discomfort. You're going to have to move through fears. You might have to move through some of the most tremendous fears that you could ever imagine. But if you're courageous and you really trust in yourself to just take little bitty action steps, you don't have to jump off some crazy cliff. Just little bitty action steps as much as you can. Keep holding that vision. Keep bringing that vision into your body. It will happen for you.
All right. And that was number two. And then is there a number three, or is that just pretty much it?
Were there three things?
Yeah, I sensed that there was, but maybe not.
Okay,
So,
well, yeah, I would say yes, there is. The other thing is like it's always about really enjoying the moment. And so whenever we're trying to create something, we can get lost in like, I'm trying to get there, but I'm here, but I want to get there. And part of the process of creator consciousness is pleasure. And so allowing yourself to realize, yes, I'm creating this, but right now, this very moment can also be enjoyable. I can be grateful. I can be fully available to it. And you actually can experience every single moment. This is hard for people to swallow in a state of pleasure. It's solely your perspective. I have challenged myself through this time and time again. All the things that I don't want to experience, the weather, the cold, whatever it is, I just breathe into my body and say, I get to experience this as pleasurable, and I can light myself up orgasmically. You can experience anything as pleasurable. And when you do that, you're opening the flow of creative life force energy. So be in the present moment, feel it as much as you can, pleasurably, feel grateful for what you're experiencing. That will open your energy so that you are creating it.
How wonderful. So as we come to a close, what would be a message that you'd like to share with the audience that as they finish listening to the podcast, that will be something potentially that will remain in their mind and perhaps be a motivator for them in their lives?
Like I mentioned, we have these innate desires, and they are unique to each individual. I've made the mistake of questioning my own innate desires, but those desires are pointing you, guiding you towards your most expressive, most powerful, most realized self. And so have the courage to own those desires in yourself. Have the courage, even if you don't know how you're going to create it. You don't have to know how. You just simply have to start setting the intention and taking the action.
And that's wonderful. And as you talk about innate desires, how do you differentiate between innate desires that are truly innate and desires that potentially have been imprinted upon you? How do you differentiate between the two?
It's the why.
It's
The
the why.
asking, why do I want this? Because if
All
you
right.
really go down that rabbit hole, it'll reveal itself to you.
And then if you find that it is somewhat ego driven, then you realize that that's not the right why. You know, I want a bigger house. Well, why? Is it to provide for my family, or is it because I want to look better in the neighborhood and among my friends? So, and you mentioned ego, and I find that that's fascinating. Alara, this has been a fascinating discussion, and obviously, you know, as people listen to this, some of it is a little unusual. You talk about the Schottky, and that seems strange, but using different words, different explanations. Everyone has a different perception. And what I think the audience hopefully understands is, you know, we all use words to explain our experiences. And for some people, they'll use a particular word that explains exactly the same experience someone else is having, but they're using different words. And so I think it's important for the audience to understand that what you're talking about is reality. It is real. You've personally experienced it. Many others have experienced it. But it's that energy that they literally can experience in their lives if they so choose to focus. Is that fairly accurate?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And folks, thanks for listening. I hope you really enjoyed this. And please, how do they reach you? How do they find you?
Absolutely. alarasage.com is my website, and Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Alara Sage. And Dr. Doug, thank you so much for having me here. You asked a really delicious question that I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks so much.